Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT and SAT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable ACT course that includes everything you need to ace your ACT test. A full textbook, tons of ACT questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exam. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast will get you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, we've got Annie Tadros from AM Professional Tutoring with us. And Annie, I'd love if you could just introduce yourself and your company briefly so that they know about your expertise.
Well, my name is Annie Tadros, and I'm the director of a boutique test prep company called AM Professional Tutoring, and we specialize in consistently helping students to get large score increases on their standardized tests. And I should point out that consistent large score increases is not the industry standard. So that is, I have an extensive academic background. Perhaps I should point that out as well. My academic background, undergraduate degree was in political science, and then I went to law school. So that's my background.
Great.
And we've been in business for nearly a quarter of a century, and we started working with students online back in 2007.
Yeah. All right. And so then let's talk a little bit today about the news that just came out, which is that the ACT organization released their national average scores for the ACT, and they are way down. And, they a drop from 20 to 19 average points might not seem like a huge drop, but in the grand scheme of the fluctuations of, what the average score is, it's much larger of a drop than has been witnessed previously, right? And so wanted to
Absolutely.
talk to you about, what you think is causing this and what are sort of the things that parents should be thinking about in terms of, what they need to do to help maybe bridge some of these gaps that are coming up.
Okay, well, first and foremost, it's important to understand what the ACT and the SAT really are. They're standardized exams which test a student's readiness for college. So the lower a student's scores are, you have obviously every college has different standards for what they require, but the lower the scores are, the more likely that a student is going to struggle
Mm-hmm.
with their college studies and conceivably not complete their college studies. I don't know if you know, but the United States has the largest rate of students who do not complete their college studies than any other country in the industrialized world.
Mm.
I believe the last figure I heard was 40% of students in the United States do not complete a 4-year program within 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
It should be a sort of a, parents are often thinking about getting their children through in college. Students and parents should also consider completing college
Mm-hmm.
as very, very important. Now, a lot of people have said that maybe one of the reasons, or the most important reason for the drop in scores, is COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly that has played a part in it, but I don't believe that that's necessarily the only reason or even the most important reason. I think another reason that should be considered is the fact that many colleges are now test optional.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of students that, may not have attained their target score first time around will simply convince themselves that it's not necessary. Parents and students will feel that way and they won't retake the test. Whereas in the past, they retook the test until they attained the required scores. But now, if they don't take the test, then overall, that would also help to bring the overall average
Right.
down. That's another thing that one should consider.
Yeah, so let's dig into these two reasons, right? I mean, I think that let's start with test optional because I think it'll be shorter. I mean, I understand your logic, right? Where if students are getting a low score and then stopping, that would potentially bring the average down, right? I think that though, I mean, personally, I feel like that's a little bit misguided. I mean, I've always been skeptical of test optional, in a universe where 47% of American high school students have a 4.0 GPA or better. I think colleges have a really hard time distinguishing between, who's a good student and who's a great student that will excel on campus, right? So for me, I
Hmm.
feel like test optional the course will reverse. I mean, naturally, I have a biased opinion on that, but I think that I think that for a lot of people, um, thinking of it more as like test preferred is still the right way to go. But I also think that in general, test optional maybe has also made a lot of people who would get a low score not take the test at all, right? So that would be kind of my
Absolutely.
counterpoint to your
Absolutely.
argument is like, well, how much of the score drop was related to people taking it once and not taking it again versus was the score increased at all by people that might have scored in the 15s and 17s just not even trying? We'll never know. But it's an interesting kind of debate. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I guess the only people who have an answer to that would be those that have the data, which is the College Board and the ACT company. And they would have the data of how many students have taken the test, how many students have taken the test multiple times. So that would probably help to answer that question. And I do not have access to that data.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I can tell you that a lot of students my understanding is that a lot of college-bound students will initially attempt the
Mm-hmm.
exam, whether it's that they take a practice test or they actually take a test, and a lot of them also still take the PSATs in junior year and sometimes in sophomore year, so they will get some inkling of what their baseline scores are. And if these students, if some, many of these students that aren't, um, I guess, getting the score that they imagined that they would, they might simply choose not to go any further than that.
Mm-hmm.
And they convince themselves that they don't need to.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that, yeah, but it's really important to realize that probably every country, or most countries in the industrialized world, and even in some third world countries, have standardized tests, either college entrance exams or high school exit exams. Same thing. Okay, whether it's high school exit or college entrance, basically, the objective of these exams is to measure a student's ability and to create a level playing fields for students from different schools, regions, and educational systems, making it easier to compare applicants on a national or even an international scale. So that's the objective of having, say, a national standardized exam versus, I know that the state of California, Florida, Texas, Massachusetts, New York, they all have standardized, like high school standardized exams, but they're not on a national scale.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you want. You want a level playing field. Okay. And another thing is that standardized tests help to ensure that students meet a minimum standard of academic
Mm-hmm.
competence. Now, remember that not all colleges require the same, have the same academic requirements. The academic requirements vary according to the stringency of any particular college
Mm-hmm.
program. So, for example, it's not, there are colleges for students that have, for example, that might score, for example, 16 on out of 36 on the ACT, or, um, you know, in the like upper 300s to 400s on the SAT. There are colleges because those colleges provide a lot of support for their students. They may have unlimited free tutoring for the students. Their programs may be less stringent, but the more competitive colleges, who have a more stringent program will require higher scores. So if you're basing it on a GPA, which, in one school, an A or an A plus in one school may very well translate to a B, a C in another school, you're not really going to get a good picture of how a student will perform on a particular at a particular college. I think I had mentioned one time to you that I had a student recently who was an A plus student at the college that this particular student
Hmm.
attended, and when she took her SATs, her scores were, well, I mean, they were in the, low
Hmm.
300s. So that tells you, for example, if this student had applied to, if all a college was using was the student's GPA, and the student applied to a stringent college and the student got admitted, there's First of all, there's a very good chance the student may not be able to pass certain courses. That's number
Right.
one. Number two, there's also a very good chance that the student may choose to withdraw from that particular college or transfer. So all these are things that need to be considered. Ultimately, what colleges want is actually what college admissions committees are looking for is the same thing that what students are looking for. They're both looking for the best fit.
Hmm.
Okay, they're both looking for, they're both colleges are looking for a student that will fit in well academically, socially, athletically, and students are also looking for that as well. Okay, so the more information that the colleges and the students have about the decision that they're making, the better the results will be of the decision they're making. Imagine a student who chooses not to go on college visits at all and decides to base their decision on either word of mouth or perhaps reading the website. They're not going to get um, you know, there's going to be there's going to be a lot more students that are going to choose to transfer or withdraw from a program if that's the only measure that they're using. If it's word of mouth of another student or of their group of
Hmm.
friends, or if it's just like looking at a website or basing it on the college's reputation, you're going to find a lot of students that may turn out not to be satisfied with the decision that they've
Hmm.
made. So, college admissions committees are basically looking when they're reviewing an application, they're interested in retention. What is retention? We want as many of the students that we accept to continue and complete their program, and as few students as possible to withdraw or transfer.
Yep.
And students are also looking for the same thing. I don't think a student applies or selects a college saying, "Well, I'm not going to make any friends there. I'm not going to perform well. I fully intend to transfer." I don't think most students make that sort of decision. Everybody wants to make a decision that's going to give them a happy
Right.
marriage. And so surprisingly enough, since they both want the same thing, I find it very, very interesting that this, test optional, saying that standardized tests, a test that can, tests that can determine, you know, like compare students on a national scale, are bad in any way. Another thing that I should mention is that there are studies which show that a student's performance on college entrance exams have a predictive validity. Okay, so the research has shown that standardized tests such as the ACT and the SAT can, not will, but can be predictive of a student's ability to succeed in college. Remember, it's not will, but
Hmm.
can. Um, Standardized tests, the SAT and the ACT, cover the subjects that are going to be important for any college program that's selected.
Hmm.
Reading, writing, math. Basic. Reading, writing, and math. Standardization, standardized tests are administered under controlled conditions with consistent instructions. When students are taking tests in schools, schools have different ways of administering exams. Okay, and another thing we should remember is that today there are a lot of online high schools. Now, a student who's taking courses in an online high school, um, if if the admissions committee were to base it exclusively on their GPA, you know that there's no way of determining when a student has completed their studies in an online high
Hmm.
school to know whether the student has done the work independently, whether they've had assistance every step of the way, or whether somebody else has completed all the work for them.
Right. Yeah. So I
Okay?
think that I mean that those are all really good thoughts, right? I think that in general, the biggest thing for me is like I agree with you that the test taking is important, and I agree with you that there can be a lot of variability in kind of how it's administered, like that. And I, at least for me, I feel like those are all kind of like small things that may not be like the thing that made the biggest impact, right? Or like for me, when I see a massive score change on the ACT, I try to think of like what are massive things that might have gone wrong or be different now than used to be. I guess that's my feedback to your thoughts so far.
Well, can you elaborate?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's like when I think of what could make such a, it's basically like a two standard deviation difference in scores, right? I really think that like it has to be a really big macro level change for that to occur, which for me, I think, is either the test optional or the pandemic is kind of what I'm thinking. Like that's my
Right,
focus a lot
right.
more than.
Yes, and I think both of those are factors are very, very important factors. The pandemic has obviously had, and this is internationally, it's not just here in the States. I mean, I was looking at a study in
Mhm.
England for their A levels and O levels, and the scores right after COVID had dropped considerably,
Right.
and that's in England. So obviously the pandemic has had some effect, but it was only 1 year. And I guess if a student was determined, they could certainly, I mean, they can certainly make up for that over with intensive work over the summer.
Yeah, they totally
Okay, so
could. I
that is
think that
conceivable.
I guess what I'm hearing from people, the other tutors that I talk to, they're saying, or this is anecdotal, but they're saying things like, kids used to come in with a 1200 or a 1300 SAT score and want to get to 1500. Now they're coming in with a 1050 SAT score and want to get to a 1500, right? And that a lot of students didn't put in the extra work to stay caught up on their schoolwork during the pandemic, in part because they, everybody else was kind of falling behind the same way. So it didn't really look
Hmm.
like anything was wrong, right?
Right.
But yeah, that's where, and then I wonder if the pandemic effect is also delayed a year too, because a lot of the kids who are affected in, say, like algebra or pre-algebra, well, that shaky foundation kind of makes it hard to get better at math the
Oh,
rest of the way.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And teachers are very frustrated, but they're also, I notice that they're moving slower. For example, I've got students that are taking honors courses, and what I would have called an honors course a few years ago, today I consider the honors program just the regular program.
Huh.
The teachers aren't moving fast in the honors program. They're going slower because they recognize that the students are not at grade level, and there's a lot of frustration there on the part of the students, on the part of the teachers particularly. So they are moving slower, and what used to be called regular level, not honors, is more today in certain schools is more like remedial.
Hmm. Wow.
So yeah, yeah, I'm noticing that. I'm noticing that at least in my state, in the state of Florida. Perhaps in other states it's a little different, but that's what I'm noticing. So it has had the pandemic has had quite an effect, but students can overcome that. It was just 1 year, and I assure you, with intensive studies over the summer, any student could get caught up
Oh yeah,
if
definitely.
they set their mind. They could if they set their mind to it. But what I am finding is a lot of students and their parents just as much. If a student isn't anywhere near the score that they would have been vying for, unless a college is either, not a test optional college, or there are merit scholarships that they're going for, the parents and the students are going to convince themselves that it is no longer that they don't need it, and that it doesn't matter, and that the admissions committee is going to make their decision based on GPA and the student's resume. But the fact of the matter is, since admissions committees are still, the game hasn't changed. The name of the game hasn't changed. It's still retention. They're still looking for students that are going to be able to, stay with the program, not withdraw, not transfer, and that are going to be able to handle the
Mhm.
program. Okay. Since the name of the game hasn't changed, basically, if a college can accept a student who presents test scores, and another student who does not present test scores and just presents their GPA and their resume, um, what do you think their decision is going to be?
Right.
They're just obviously, all other things being equal, both of them have the same GPA. One submits test scores, the other doesn't. What's the more certain decision to make? What's the more informed decision to make for the admissions committee to make? Can you imagine the financial impact on a college if a significant number of their students either withdrew or transferred
Hmm.
because was not the right fit because it was not the right fit academically? Can you imagine what the impact would
Right.
be? I mean, it's untenable, really. you know um really, no, really, seriously. I mean, if you think that 30, 40, 50% of your incoming class would either withdraw or transfer, that's, you do have to think of the bottom line as well. I mean, it's not good in any way for the institution that's accepted them. So colleges still want to make a decision which will ensure a good fit for the
Hmm.
student. So, which is really interesting that the state of California has, for their state colleges, has chosen to go test blind. That's a very interesting decision, which I think is, in my personal opinion, is totally politically motivated.
Mm.
Because why would somebody want to make an important decision with less information if you have the possibility of having more information? At least test optional says we will consider your tests if you apply, whereas the California state schools are turning around and saying submit scores and we're going to toss them out.
Yeah, I
That to me,
also am very confused by that policy too, but I think that it's like I said, I think that sort of we've reached high tide on that kind of thing because I think a lot of colleges are going back to being like, man, these scores are really useful.
yeah, and oh, for student athletes, here's the interesting thing. When I started test prep about 25 years ago, a lot of this, for admissions to colleges, a lot of the top level student athletes, the colleges weren't even really taking a look at many colleges really take a look at their test
Hmm.
scores. And just, they just took them on the strength of their athletic skills. And they gave them their athletic scholarships based on the strength of their athletic scholarships. Well, here's the problem. Many of these students that were given the scholarships were barred from playing because I don't know if you know, but every single college has a certain minimum GPA that a student requires in order to be able to play. If they don't attain that minimum GPA, they're not allowed to play. So a lot of these students just didn't have, I guess, the academic requirements, and so the colleges wound up giving scholarships away that weren't being used. They didn't have players. They didn't have players. So colleges changed course on that, and for student athletes, they began requiring having setting standards, setting requirements for test scores. Okay, and that has worked very, very well. Now, student athletes are given a break for the most part. Not all student athletes, depends on which sport, which college. They are given there are different academic requirements for admissions for student athletes than there are for non-student athletes, but they have set it. The coaches have had set certain standards to ensure that the student could at least maintain the minimum academic standards required to ensure that the athlete played.
Yep.
Take that away, and also imagine that a lot of student athletes, uh, not all of them, but a significant amount, complete their academics using an online program, a complete online high school. And what have you got? I mean, again, we're back to where we
Hmm.
were, 25, 30 years ago, where you could very well be giving, you know, using funds, using athletic scholarships for students who aren't going to be able to play.
Yep. Yeah, that all makes sense. Well, any closing thoughts or anything else you wanted to cover when it comes to like the ACT national scores and just the effects that could be contributing to it?
Oh, uh, from my perspective, I tell you, Tyler, I I feel confident in saying that if students understood, I mean, test optional, it's good. It's good to give students other, you know, I guess other avenues. Choices are good, but students have to understand that if they don't show some form, if there isn't some form of standardization um, in the application that they submit,
Hmm.
like maybe a certain number of AP courses where they've gotten scores of 3 or higher, um, or an SAT or an ACT. I think that these are going to have an impact um, on their admission. That's at least certainly to the more stringent schools. And I really believe that student scores would on these tests would not be dropping precipitously if students recognized that it's still that these test scores still have an impact on their
Right.
application. These test scores were never the end all and be
Hmm.
all, ever.
Hmm.
Okay, they were just part of, um, sort of, if you want to call it the holistic admissions approach. Okay, it was just one component of many, but it is a significant component nonetheless.
Right.
And I think if students still recognize that it is a significant component, they would be there would be more effort applied to improving one's scores versus simply walking away from the test completely.
Right.
And that, in my opinion, would help to improve the overall average of these test scores, I think.
Yeah. I like that as a conclusion and a way to wrap up this episode. So thank you. That I think that was a very good point. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Annie Tadros from AM Professional Tutoring. You can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT course by going to achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.